This is the Brightin 50mm f1.4 AF. It's their first autofocusing lens, at least that I'm aware of, and I'll be reviewing it today on Fujifilm X-Mount. We're going to check out the image quality, the build quality, everything there really is to know about this thing, if it autofocuses well, and if it's a good value for money at $229. Let's check it out. First thing, in terms of build quality, this thing feels really well built in the hand compared to a lot of third-party lenses that I've tested in the past, even the metal built ones, especially whenever they start going towards autofocus versus manual focus. They usually cut costs in terms of build quality, but it's good to see that Brightin has maintained their high build quality while also having good image quality, as we'll see a little bit later. There's a good, well-dampened focus ring. I mean, it makes a little bit of that sort of sound, but that's really not that big of a deal. And for the most part, because this is an autofocusing lens, I probably won't be using that manual focus ring, to be honest. There's also sort of this fake aperture ring thing that is not really an aperture ring. There's these ridges, but it does not turn, and you do in fact have to change the aperture with the dial on your camera. For a third-party lens, this is a really good implementation of a lens hood. Not only is it not very flimsy, but it locks on there really well, even with a push-button lock. And once it's on there, it stays on pretty good, even better than some Fujifilm first-party lens hoods that I've seen in the past. So this is really great. It's easy to turn it around, put it on, take it off. And finally, on the rear here, there is a nice dark metal mount, which I do like that when they don't have that bright silver metal and they have this dark sort of gunmetal look. That looks really nice to me. On there you find a USB-C port for firmware updates, if they ever do release updates for the autofocusing algorithms in this thing. It also has a 58mm filter thread size, which is a super common filter thread for an APS-C lens, which, by the way, this is an APS-C only lens. This is not going to work and fill out a full frame sensor, but that is very common, 58mm. So you're probably, if you're going to use this for filming or, you know, anything else, if you're going to use a circular polarizer on it, if you have APS-C cameras and you're buying this to add to your system, you might already have filters with that filter thread size, so that's nice and convenient. So now we're going to talk about image quality, and one thing I always like to keep in mind when I talk about image quality on a lens is to keep the price point in mind. At $229, we got to keep that in the back of our head when we consider image quality. And that's not to say this is a poorly performing lens in terms of image quality. I would actually say quite the opposite, but I think it's always important as a lens reviewer, in order to really kind of stay objective and fair to the lens that I'm talking about, it's important to keep the price in the back of your head. So when we're talking about sharpness, I wouldn't say that's an issue, but of course this performs well when you stop it down. But really the thing most people are going to be interested in looking at when you're talking about a lens like this is its performance wide open at f1.4, because realistically, people who are interested in this lens, especially in the Fujifilm system I'm thinking specifically, they want a nice portrait lens like the 56 1.2 Fujifilm, but that's out of their price range, so they look to third-party options like this where it still autofocuses and you still get almost that 1.2 aperture, you get 1.4, but it's nice and cheap as well at the $229 price tag. And the other important thing to consider is that there's no other option from Fujifilm that fills this void. They have their 56 1.2, they have their 50mm f2, and their 50mm f1.0. Nothing at 1.4, kind of in that middle ground. The other very important thing to consider with a lens of this type is the quality of its background blur or bokeh. The quality of that autofocus background is not too jittery, it's not distracting, but the one thing I would say is there's a little bit of like ghosting, less precision whenever things are just starting to fall out of focus, but they're not fully blurred out in the background. In terms of the autofocus performance, I didn't find myself to really be missing many shots. I would say for the most part, I did photograph with this lens on single point autofocus, so it just focuses once and then you're taking a picture, for me, for the most part, of static subjects that are not moving. And the few examples where I did use this lens alongside my other lenses, in situations where I was using autofocus continuous, like for me specifically, where I was shooting some music photos of people performing music live, I kept it on autofocus continuous with face tracking, and I did notice that sometimes it would slightly miss when I was letting it continuously focus, but I would say it performs best whenever you're using it for static subject photography, so like portraiture. It's going to perform better than like sports and action and even like music photography. I didn't really notice anything in terms of chromatic aberrations, but I'll be honest, I didn't stress test the lens for that. But even when I zoom into some brighter parts of my image that have high contrast, I don't see that green and purple fringing. So it's possible that there are some ED elements in this. I'll put a screenshot on screen if I find that in their marketing materials. I did not refresh myself on that before I started filming this. The main drawback of this lens, I would say, is it does have a tendency to flare, especially when you're shooting into a strong light source like the sun. And the flare can be a bit distracting. It's like multicolored depending on the exact angle that the sun is kind of hitting the front element of the lens. Luckily, it does have that included lens hood, and if you have to, you can shield the lens with your hand because it is a longer focal length and your hand doesn't very easily enter the frame. But overall, I think this lens is a great value for money for what you're getting, the autofocus and the f1.4 aperture for this $229 price tag. The closest thing Fuji has in terms of price is their 50mm f2 at, I believe, $450, so quite a big difference there in terms of price, and you're getting a stop less of light let in. So people in the Fujifilm system, if you're a new photographer and you have your kit lens and you're deciding that you want to go into portraits and that's sort of the thing that you like, and you want to get that blurry background, but you don't want to mess with manual focus, and you just want to specialize and get a lens that's good at that, this might be a good first step if that 56 1.2 is looking a little bit too expensive for you. I will say I try to stay completely objective in these videos when it comes to personal preference, but me personally, I don't really like this 50mm focal length on APS-C sensors because it becomes a 75mm full frame equivalent, which is a bit awkward for anything outside of subject photography like portraits, but it's not quite good for product photography because it doesn't focus super close. This lens, I don't know, I didn't mention earlier, but it focuses pretty averagely close for this focal length. I believe it's 0.5 meters, which is completely average for this for a portrait lens, but that's not often close enough for certain subject photography. So it really only is good for portraits, and it's not quite long enough to be sort of a telephoto prime lens. If you decide to purchase the lens through my affiliate link, I do get a slight kickback, though it doesn't cost any more for you. So if you got something out of this information that I brought to you and you are interested in buying it anyway, that would really help me out. Go ahead and use my affiliate link. I appreciate that. I hope you enjoy the new studio space here. I know the audio is slightly more echoey than it used to be. I did get a couple sound panels I have up, but I don't have the room fully soundproof by any means. It's just an empty like cement room. I put some sort of mat down as sort of carpet-like to sort of eat up some sound, but this is what we got now. We don't have that cool wood background anymore, so if you liked how the old background looked, sorry, we're not going to be seeing that anymore. So let me know if you have any ideas of how we can decorate this studio space, either with lighting or any other ideas you have in terms of what we can put in the background to make it more visually interesting. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.